eventful trip. And I'm going to talk about what Ron Scherer promised, namely breathing and voice. The first thing I would like to point out is that we all know how to breathe. And the problem is then, why should it be so important to voice? But there are a number of very, very good reasons why it should be important. And one is that the fact that if we want to raise the pitch of phonation, we stretch the vocal folds, as Ron Scherer just mentioned. And if you stretch the folds, they won't vibrate with very low pressure anymore. So they need a bit more pressure to start vibrating when they are stretched. So change of pitch then means that you need to change the pressure. As soon as the composer says that this is a new pitch, or if you want to emphasize something, you need to prepare that with a higher pressure so the vocal folds start to vibrate. A pitch variation is wide in speech and in expressive singing also. So now the point is that pressure is controlled by the breathing system, of course. So that is one reason why breathing is important to voice. Now, subglottal pressure in speech, here we have an example from myself. I said this, it's a bit shy, but I will try to convince it here. So what happens inside me? I had a little pressure transducer in the trachea, and this is the audio, and this is the fundamental frequency. And then you could see the subglottal pressure, which was measured in real time then, and you could see then that there are peaks and there are valleys, and the difference between the valley down here is 5 centimeters of water column, and here it is about 25 centimeters of water column. So there is quite a lot of variation of subglottal pressure if you mean something with what you are speaking about. A classical exercise for singers is this, and so on, twice. And that is an excellent example of changes in pitch. So we could then predict that this must be produced with very different subglottal pressures. And this is the fundamental frequency, and here is the pressure traced from measurements. So it is interesting to see that the first member of the new chord gets the main pressure, the highest pressure, even though it's not the highest tone. So you need to adapt the subglottal pressure to pitch and to where you are in the phrase and what you want to emphasize. And if you think of doing this with short notes, then the odd thing is that when you do that and not that is that you open the glottis between the notes. And if you open the glottis and have subglottal pressure there, you lose the breath, you lose the air. It will be exhaled immediately. So this is a wonderful exercise for tuning the pressure for the first note and then bringing it down to 0 for the silent interval between the tones, and then the new tone needs a higher pressure and then down to 0, and then higher pressure and then down to 0. So it reminds me of piano players who could sit and look in the ceiling and hit exactly the pitches that the keys that they want and intend to. This is what we need to do when in singing. Okay. Voice onset is another fascinating aspect. We could have hard onsets, and that means then that adduction, the bringing together of the vocal folds, is starting, and then comes the subglottal pressure, and then that means that we have a sudden attack when it when the vibration of the vocal folds start. Adduction first, subglottal pressure later. Now there is another voice onset which could be called the staccato, ha 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 ha, and there the adduction and the subglottal pressure, they start at the same time. So we have a synchrony between adduction and subglottal pressure. And then we have the breathy onset, ha 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 ha, and that is then the subglottal pressure comes first and then comes adduction. So these things are things that we are controlling, and it is an expressive means. We have to a voiced consonant and a vowel. We may want to have a glottal attack there, min egen or min egen. That is meaning different things, even though the tone is the same. Okay. So exercise for control of glottal adduction and subglottal pressure. That is what we have in the voice onset. Subglottal pressure is absolutely crucial to voice timbre. It is one of the main control parameters. So here is an illustration of the effects of subglottal pressure. Here, the steepness of the pulse, and that it is determining the vocal loudness. It's the steepness of the end of the air pulse. And that is then from the voice source, that is the crucial thing that decides how many decibels we get out of the mouth, given the pitch and the form and frequency, the first form and frequency. The closed face also is completely dependent on the subglottal pressure. If we increase the subglottal pressure, the duration of the closed face increases. Okay? So there is the closed face, and that is increasing when you increase the subglottal pressure. So I'm sending the gospel here that subglottal pressure is very important, and you control it by the breathing apparatus, and that is why breathing is important to voice. And then we come also to the amplitude of the flow pulses, and that is decisive to the voice quality, and then the vocal loudness is also, the spectrum slope is very, very much dependent upon how much subglottal pressure you have. So the increase from soft to loud at low frequencies is just a fraction of the increase in the higher spectrum passes from near 2 or 3 kilohertz. Yeah. So that's it. Now we have also a phenomenon that is called the tracheal pull, and that is a mechanical link between the breathing system and the phonatory system. It is of great relevance. The tracheal pull is caused by the fact that the lungs are big and they are hanging in the larynx, and the larynx is hanging in the skull. So there is a pull. The lungs want to bring the package, the hyoid, the thyroid and cricoid, the larynx down. Now, the interesting thing is that it not only trying to pull the entire larynx down, but it also tries to open the glottis. And it induces, it tends to induce glottal abduction, opening of the glottis. And that is, as Ron Scherer mentioned, the key function for regulating the voice timbre, the phonation time. So, in fact, the tracheal pull tends to counteract pressed phonation. Pressed phonation is produced with exaggerated glottal adduction, and you could then reduce that risk if you allow the tracheal pull to be big. Now, what is it that regulates the tracheal pull? Well, it's a mechanical link, as I said, between the voice and the breathing, and it is stronger when the diaphragm is far down in the trunk. And I will return to that in a little while. And that means that after inhalation, that expands the abdominal wall and or widens the flanks. The tracheal pull is stronger than when the abdominal wall is contracted, if it is pulled into the towards the spine. And it is weaker than when the abdominal wall is pulled in, and when that means when the diaphragm is high in the trunk. That means after, for instance, exhalation or at the end of the phrase, when you have expelled a lot of air and the diaphragm is high in the trunk. Yeah. So lung volume affects voice in untrained particularly, and in trained voices, the owner of the voice has command over the voice function. So this is more of pedagogical interest than of interest to the skilled professional singer. Okay, so untrained voices, that we could see the effect of the tracheal pull in less breast phonation at high than at low lung volumes, and in singers no difference. Ascending, well, this has an application, and that is the following. When phonation is going on, lung volume is constantly decreasing. So that means that we start phrases at high lung volume and end phrases at lower lung volume. So high pitches could be produced with high lung volume or with low lung volume. What decides that? Well, that is the direction of the melody. If the melody is falling from high to low, the high notes are appearing at high lung volumes, and then the low pitches at lower lung volume. So that could be something to try with voices that are pressing high pitches. And vice versa, high pitches produced with low lung volume in melodies that are a rising pitch pattern, because then the high note is produced at low lung volume, and that means then that it may be good for people who have a breathy phonation of high pitches. Now, a few words about the machinery of the apparatus. There are three forces affecting subglottal pressure. One is muscular, and the second one is elasticity, and the third one is gravitation. The muscles are distributed in two main muscle systems for expanding and compressing the lungs. And expanding the lungs means that we lower the pressure in the lungs, and that if the airways are open, we inhale. And the opposite is when we compress the lungs. Okay. External and internal intercostals, they travel between the ribs, and they can expand and they can compress the rib cage. And then we have the diaphragm and the abdominal wall, and the diaphragm lowers or raises the floor of the rib cage. The diaphragm lowers the floor, and the abdominal wall raises the floor in the rib cage. So the diaphragm is an inhalatory muscle, and abdominal wall is an exhalatory muscle. Now let's see how they are located in the body. The intercostals, some are diagonal and some are vertical. The internal, they squeeze the rib cage, and the external, the diagonal ones, they are lifting the ribs. So if you lift the ribs, then you expand the volume of the rib cage, and vice versa if you compress it. So intercostals can expand and compress the rib cage. It's a complete breathing system in the rib cage. But there is another one also, and that is the abdominal wall muscles. Because you could contract the abdominal wall and you could let it go out, expand it. And when it contracts, it is pushing the diaphragm into the rib cage. And when the diaphragm is contracting, it flattens, so it lowers the floor in the rib cage. The diaphragm, yeah. This is not the diaphragm. And the diaphragm sits inside us, and it is vaulted like a salad bowl, and when it contracts, it flattens. And when contracting, it lowers the rib cage floor, and thus expanding the lungs. Okay, and if contracting against contracted abdominal wall, if you contract both the abdominal wall and the diaphragm, you could get an expansion of the flanks, because that would be a lever effect. Okay. Diaphragm can be deliberately contracted and relaxed, of course. Some people still believe that it's impossible, that the diaphragm is completely automatically controlled. That is true when you have resting tidal breathing. Breathing in peace, then it goes by itself, and we don't control it. But you could always control it if you want. And if you contract the diaphragm, the abdominal wall goes out. So this is, no, I don't want to talk about it. So you could just say hello to your diaphragm. Strain your abdominal wall if you make your abdominal wall hard, and then you pronounce a soft S. Then you contract the diaphragm together with the abdominal walls. And everybody could do that. Yeah. So the shape of the lungs, no, they don't look like this. They don't look like a more like a robot. So that means that they are bigger downstairs than upstairs. And that means if we expand the lungs in the lower part of the rib cage, we get more air and more oxygen than if we try to expand it in the upper part. Inhalation with expansion of the upper part of the rib cage gets at least less air than inhalation in the lower part. Okay, now this is a self-evident thing. When the diaphragm is contracting, it flattens, as I mentioned, and that means that the abdominal wall has to expand, because we have, most of us is 90% water, and it's difficult to compress water. So so the abdominal content needs to go somewhere when it can't go into the rib cage anymore, and that means that diaphragmatic contraction is causing an expansion of the abdominal wall. And then when you contract the abdominal wall, the diaphragm flies. And that is the background of the floor of the rib cage that I mentioned. Now, this was the muscle forces, the ones in the rib cage and the abdominal wall and the diaphragm. Now we turn to elasticity, and if you inhale a lot of air and close the glottis and then relax, you will exhale. And if you do the opposite, exhale, close the glottis, relax, you inhale. So there is elasticity in the breathing system. And that is rather self-evident, of course. So you have done this, so we don't want to go into it. But I could go into more fascinating and that is that this elasticity contributes to the subglottal pressure. Of course, if you have lots of air in the lungs, elasticity is outward, it is exhalatory, and it is strong. And if you are at low lung volumes, you have inhalatory elasticity forces. So what the energy, the force that you need to spend with the mid-muscular components of the breathing system differs. This is the magnitude, typical values of the magnitude of the elasticity pressures caused. 30 centimeters of water column, that is that is about 30 centimeters of water column. And then minus a suction of 20 centimeters of water column towards the very end of the phrase. So it's a huge variation, 50 centimeters of water column. Okay, we have a point of balance. Here we have the lung volume, 100% full lung volumes and empty. And at some point it passes zero. The subglottal pressure caused by the elasticity passes zero. This is a magic lung volume because the elasticity forces are positive above it and negative below it. That is called the resting expiratory level or the functional residual capacity. And that is a magic lung volume. How does it feel to visit your resting expiratory level? I recommend a sigh of hopelessness. It's quite reproducible. And it is also important to see the responsibility of the muscles in keeping the target pressures in the lungs, that is the subglottal pressure that is so important to the voice source. So let's assume that you need to speak to have a soft voice that is going to be lasting for a long time. So it needs to be, you need then to keep the subglottal pressure at a low value. But the elasticity pressure is far beyond what you need. So that means then that you need to contract, activate your inhalatory muscles. And then inhalatory activation is needed at soft singing at high lung volumes. Inhalare large. And then exhalatory activation is needed at low lung volumes. So it is shifting all the time. The responsibility, the demands on muscular forces of the peritoneum. And for the subglottal pressure at high loudness, then you may need to have exhalation force running all the time. Not so much when the elasticity forces are big, and less and more when they are low. Okay. Now, gravitation. Everything is ruled by gravitation, and we should be grateful for that. No things fly up in the ceiling. And that means then that the abdominal content wants to go further down. And that means it is pulling down the diaphragm, and that is an inhalatory muscle. But if you tip your student or yourself to a supine position, then the abdominal wall wants, the abdominal content wants to float into the rib cage, so it's an exhalatory force then. Okay, but lung volume is more than this. How much air you can inhale in your lungs? Well, it depends on who you are, how tall you are, and how old you are, and what gender you are. So old people who are short and female, they don't have very big lungs on average, but tall people who are young, they have a lot. So that's a variation. But I don't think this is very important, because you could always handle what the resources you have. It is more interesting to see how much the lung volume could vary. This is then vital capacity that could go from zero when you have exhaled all you can, and 100% vital capacity, that is when you have inhaled all you can. Okay, now the charming thing with the REL, the resting expiratory level, is that that is the lung volume where you start inhalation. That means inhalation in tidal restful breathing is active. That is a question of muscular activity. But exhalation is passive. That goes with the elasticity forces. So active inhalation is active, exhalation is in peaceful breathing. Okay, and then it is also another point. We don't like to speak at lung volumes below resting expiratory level. It doesn't feel comfortable. So, yeah, you could try it, not here perhaps, because it will not, but try to have a hopeless sigh and then go on to speak without inhaling. It feels uncomfortable. Most people always try to find a little chance to inhale when they reach the resting expiratory level. And that is rather interesting because you see there's a lot of air, lung volume, juice stored in the breathing system below resting expiratory level, but we don't use that. We don't find that interesting or comfortable. Okay, so I recommend this when you're going to sleep now. Hopeless sigh and then start to speak without inhaling first. Okay. Very entertaining. Now, some composers like to write very long phrases, and that means then that you need to inhale deeply, and that means then that you need to have control over lots of elasticity forces. And in conversational speech, there is not, you don't need that. So we are rather lazy then. We don't half a liter or something to take in, and then we always have a chance to inhale when we feel approach the resting expiratory level. Okay, but classically trained singers, they need to deal with a lot of elasticity forces. Now, this is breathing behavior is another interesting aspect of voice, and this is a display of the new developed rest track system that provides a real-time visualization. We will have a workshop in this on Friday afternoon, Philippe Allaire and I, and we have then possibilities to show the rib cage in one track, and the abdominal wall in another track, and then the lung volume in a third track, and then the voice in audio signal in a separate track. So you could see exactly where you are. And what is interesting is also a new article, reasonably new article by Salomoni and co-authors in PLOS 2016, they have been measuring lots of aspects of the breathing patterns, the total lung volume, and then how much of the total lung volume is inhaled through the rib cage and how much was inhaled by the abdominal wall. And then they could measure also what is the phase relationship, what is the time difference between the peak of the abdominal wall and the peak of the rib cage. They are not synchronized. They are very different between different people. So that can be very interesting to track. And also, this is the start of an extent, because here you compress the lung a bit to establish subglottal pressure, and then how quickly does the abdominal wall go in. This is also very personal. Several people stick out, have their tummy out all the phrase. Some have it out during inhalation and then pull it in, and some have it tucked in all the way. So that is also something that could be measured and interesting. Yeah, subglottal pressure I have measured so many times now, so you get bored. But how does the subglottal pressure feel when you change it in the body? Well, if you just produce an S consonant that varies between loud and soft, that's produced with subglottal pressure variation. So we all are very skilled in producing that. Okay, so that. And subglottal pressure variation is quite different. In a classical publication from the 50s, this graph was published, subglottal pressure versus time in a onset sentence, and it stayed quite stable. And if we look at stage speech, then we have enormous variation, and also bringande på en bondgård, as I showed from the subglottal pressure to speech. And then singing is quite different from all other things. So no wonder that you need to train your control of subglottal pressure. Okay, and here we have some examples of singers from different classifications. Here we have the pitch, and there we have the subglottal pressure in centimeters of water color. You see that there is an enormous variation. I could see that dramatic sopranos are generally using higher pressures than lyric sopranos, and female belts, they are very high, up to 50 centimeters of water color, and so on and so forth. So it is varying quite a lot, and I think a good voice teacher hears what is the subglottal pressure, and that is good and healthy. Okay, that is a summary. Breathing apparatus determines subglottal pressure, and it's controlled by intercostal diaphragm and elasticity and gravitation. Lung volume, and there the resting expiratory level is important. If you are high or if you are low, smaller lung volumes are generally used in speech and larger in singing. The tracheal pull is an important aspect of breathing and voice, because it tends to abduct the vocal folds, and that means when the diaphragm is low in the body, they have a tendency to use less strong glottal adduction. That means staying away from pressed phonation. And so glottal pressure is the main phonation control factor, controls vocal loudness, and it needs to be higher for high than for low pitches, and it is exaggerated subglottal pressure and glottal adduction is typically leading to pressed phonation, and habitual pressed phonation is no good, but if you could do it for expressive purposes, it's probably quite okay. That's it. Thank you.